Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. The Killer Women vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast. I'm your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Jennifer Hillier. Jennifer imagines the worst about people and then writes books about it. She's the USA Today bestselling author of 7 psychological thrillers, including the national bestseller Little Secrets, finalist Los Angeles Times Book Prize and Anthony Award winner, and Jar of Hearts, winner of the ITW Thriller Award and finalist for the Anthony and Macavity Awards. Whew. Her novels have been published in 22 languages, and her new book, which we're going to talk about today, Things We Do in the Dark, is out July 19th. A Filipino-Canadian born and raised in Toronto, Jennifer spent several years in the Seattle area before returning home to Canada. She's a Seahawks fan, but she married a Packers guy. They have a young son who looks most like her when he's crying. Her favorite author is Stephen King, but whose isn't? She's afraid of the dark and can't sleep unless she's checked the locks on the door several times. She loves writing when it's raining, sleeping when it's sunny, and reading after everyone else has gone to bed. She cherishes her family, those who read and those who don't, her friends, those who write and those who don't. She currently lives in Oakville, Ontario, with her husband and son. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God,
I'm
it's such
happy
a
to
treat.
be here.
I tried to match, I always try to match my cover.
I love it.
This is such a beautiful cover. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit about this, something special about this cover, because I saw on social media. But first, tell our listeners and our viewers about Things We Do in the Dark.
Oh, the elevator pitch. Okay.
Yes, I know. Come on.
Which I'm terrible at. I stumble through them. Things We Do in the Dark is my newest psychological thriller, and it stars a woman married to a much older celebrity, and her husband turns up dead in the bathtub behind her with her holding a straight razor. She's arrested for his murder, and as the media frenzy begins to happen, she is more terrified that her secrets from her past are going to come to light almost than she is getting charged or convicted for his murder. So there's a dual timeline happening in Things We Do in the Dark, and it's partially set in Toronto for the first time, which is my hometown. So it's half in Seattle, half in Toronto, and it stars a Filipino protagonist for the first time.
Which is okay. So first of all, I'm going to add a little to this woman she basically finds her husband dead in the bathtub, and from the shock, she slips and falls and knocks herself out. So she basically,
and all this is in the beginning, so this is not a spoiler. Right.
No, this is like the first scene. And she, wakes up to somebody screaming because her husband's assistant has shown up and found them. And of course she's holding a straight razor, which is how he dies. So it's like, she looks really, really guilty.
It looks really bad.
Yes. And her alibi is not quite squared away. And so there's a lot of kind of scary stuff happening for her. But the timeline deals with the main character's name is Paris Peralta, and she we deal with her very difficult childhood, as well as of course the stresses of her current. And then there's a third character who I like so much, who is a journalist who is also involved, and he's
journalist turned podcaster. Drew.
He's quite fabulous. I'm
glad.
I really adore Drew. So let's talk about this, because one of the things that's interesting about this book, I think, is how horrible the main character's mother is, right? And you talk about,
but she's terrible.
And one of the things you comment on, and I'm skipping around sort of in the things I want to talk about, so I'll have to come back, but I wanted to sort of talk about this because it's so interesting to me. Is there's a comment by the mother about how she is a horrible mother, because her mother was horrible. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. So I was going to ask you, right? Because of course, one of the one of the big questions that psychologists as well as authors are confronted with is the nature versus nurture.
Yes.
So, what do you think? I mean, what's the balance?
I think
Can
it's,
evil be born?
I think it's both, and I think what's interesting is that Ruby, who's the mother in the book, who says to her daughter, I'm a bad mother because I had a bad mother. That's probably Ruby's only self-aware comment in the entire book, because basically she's unredeemable. And I wrote her that way because I didn't feel like I wanted her to be sympathetic. This is just she's a terrible mom and she does awful things, and there's no excuse or justification for that. But her one little comment about how I'm a bad mother because my mother was a bad mother, I feel like these are things that are passed down. I think our moms, and I'm a mom, so I can say this too, you do the best you can, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
you do the best you can, and you hope and pray you're not going to fuck up your kids.
It's so true. But I don't think,
I
don't think Ruby, and maybe that's true. Maybe that was the best. I don't think I give her enough.
I know, and I'm not giving her credit because she really was a terrible mother, and she knew better. But she has a sister who was raised by the same mother.
Right.
And her sister, Flora, did not turn out that way towards her own children. And so I feel like partially there's something off about Ruby, probably from the day she was born.
Right.
And then the way that they were raised in the Philippines, in this case, contributed to those, whatever, internal personality traits.
Right.
Flourishing the way that they did, but I don't know that it happened for Flora. So it's both, I think.
Right. Right. And it is so interesting that you're right. That is like the only self-aware thing she talks about, that she sort of mentions in the whole book. Because she is, and her daughter is really so self-aware, right? So aware of sort of how she was damaged by that, and how she lives her life. She uses her mother in some ways as a contrast. Everything that Ruby did, I'm going to not do, which I love about that. So I'm backing up now because I just think that was so interesting. And it seems to me that, that the mother Ruby really blames her upbringing. But like you said, Flora's not like, she's not winning any.
She's not an angel either.
No.
She's not very kind to her niece,
No.
but at the same time, she doesn't abuse her children the way that Ruby abused her daughter. So it was fun writing Ruby though, because when you're writing a character that has that gives no fucks, right?
Yes.
In terms of the one person who loves her the most, right, will treat whoever, however. There's a freedom in writing a character like that, but there were times when I felt like I needed a shower, after writing scenes with her in it, because I'm like, that's brutal. But I was inspired I saw a Netflix documentary a couple of years ago as the idea was percolating, called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Okay. And it's a Netflix documentary. It's like a 4-part series about a boy who fell through the cracks of the system. He grew up with a really abusive mom, and her boyfriend was really abusive. And he died at the age of 9. He was malnourished. He was horribly beaten throughout most of his life. And when they did the autopsy, right, because the boyfriend and the mom were on trial for his murder, the amount of injuries they found was just devastating and heartbreaking. And, the teachers were sort of aware, but they didn't do enough. The social workers were sort of aware, but they didn't do enough. Right. And this kid just kind of got missed. And so that was the inspiration for Joey. A lot was, what happens if you're in this environment where everyone kind of sees, but doesn't, and so then you get missed, and then this is your life. Right. Oh, whatever the opposite of winning the parent lottery is what happened to Joey. So
and I think it's so prevalent, right? I mean, this is something that happened. Joey is such a real character because, of course, the scenario, we know it happens every day, all the time. So
it does. And it's a hard thing to watch. And when I started to watch it, I was understanding why people were like, I'm trying to watch this documentary, but I can't. I just can't.
Right.
And I thought, I get it.
You're saying,
and I get it.
Age, right?
I know he's 7, right? So and Gabriel was 8, right? So I fully get it, but I felt obligated to watch it. Like when I started, I'm like, this is why he didn't get help, is because we got uncomfortable and we looked away. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch this, 4 hours of awfulness, because I feel it's the least I can do is to see what happened to him. And to make myself aware.
Right. It's so true. And I think that that's one of the reasons we write fiction, right? Is that we're taking, we're taking really horrible scenarios and bringing them to light in a way that, that makes them digestible, but also
Yeah.
hopefully raises awareness that this stuff really happens,
Yeah. It's
It's just
both
horrible.
selfish, but also kind of a public service in some
Yeah.
ways where, like you said, we're taking something really awful and really prevalent. And it's selfish because I know that for me, I want to make sense of it for myself. And so writing
Yes.
about those dark things is a way for me to kind of understand
Right.
where, how, why this happens. And
Right.
also to give myself a little bit of a happy ending in whatever
Right.
way I
Right.
can in a fictional world. But also, it does shed light. So, I mean, I know that I'm sure it's the same for you, but reading growing up, it teaches you so much empathy. It teaches you about different people's lives and their lived
Right.
experiences.
Right.
And how else were we going to learn about that? So we learn that through books a lot. So
I think not enough people read,
yeah, I agree.
And I do think it's the only opportunity you really have to be, in somebody, like in the life of somebody who grew up like Joey, or a person of color, or, for someone like me who grew up like, I'm pretty vanilla. It's an opportunity to live a lot of different lives. And I think that's so valuable. I wish my daughter is really a reader. My son is not a reader. And I wish I could, I mean, it is what it is, because that's a
Yeah,
weird thing about children. You can
right.
force
Same
them.
environment, right? Same
Right.
influences, and one takes to it and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe he's only 20, so there's hope, right? So
He has to find that magic book.
Yes, I keep looking for him. So it's so interesting because I love the idea that you just mentioned that you'd watched that Netflix documentary a couple of years ago. So how does your process work? How, what, you were inspired in this instance by the documentary. Do ideas percolate for you for a while before you start writing? Are you percolating something new while you're working on something current? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think for me, it always starts with a seed, right? And the character I could see most clearly, actually, when I started thinking about the book was Ruby, was the abusive mother. And I wanted to dive into the abusive mother. And I actually thought it was going to be Ruby's story,
Interesting.
But then when I watched that show, I was like, I'm actually more interested in what would have happened had Gabriel lived.
Right.
So he died, right? He died at age 8, age 9. What if he had lived? Would he have grown up to be a monster too?
Right.
Would there have been any hope of him living a normal life? If he had children, would he pass that down to his kids? And that became the more interesting question that I wanted to answer. And so Ruby's in it, but it really did become about, her daughter's story. But it's I'm not great with book ideas. And
interesting. Well, you write fabulous books. So
but the thing is, it's kind of like getting a little bit of a drop and then squeezing it, like
yeah.
I get maybe a good book idea once every other year. Basically, that's the book pace I'm on, and I will stick with it. I'll be that, I will be all over it, and I will wring everything I can out of it, because I know that there isn't going to be another idea coming, and it's awful. I have friends who, I'm sure you're this way too, who have lots of ideas, and you're writing something.
I know.
And there's like, oh, I have another idea. Oh, let me finish this first. I'm like, no, this is the only one. I get one bus that comes by every 2 years. If I don't get on that bus, I miss it. So it sucks.
You're squeezing blood from the turnip, as it were.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
but that works, and I love that you're. There's so many people, and I feel this. I feel this, the pressure from the industry that you're supposed to put out a book a year, and it's.
Yes.
I'm like, that is, and I have done that in the past. I'm not doing
that
right now.
Do you know?
No, I'll have a novella coming out this week. But I couldn't do a full.
Congrats.
I know, thank you. I couldn't do a full book this year. I was like, the paces, and there are people, and I talk to them. They're like, they write a Jamie Lee Lynn Hendricks was saying the other day, she wrote a book in 6 weeks. I'm like, what? That's insane.
That only happened to me one time. I did write one book, ironically, with the other Filipino character in it. My third book I wrote in 7 weeks, and it will never happen again.
Well, you got to manifest it, Jennifer. You got to be like,
I just met my husband, and we were like in that sort of dating honeymoon stage. Yeah. And we were a long distance, and I had a trip planned to go see him in 7 weeks. And I'm like, I need to bang this out because I want to enjoy my time. when
Right.
I'm visiting him and not have this book deadline hanging over my head. And I finished it in 7 weeks, and it will never happen again.
Well,
That
of
was
course
my incentive, was like,
yeah, and your life is so different. Let's be honest, having a
yeah,
family, not living, I mean,
yes.
if you were alone in a bubble for 7 weeks, I'm sure you could do something
Oh,
amazing
I
too.
was
But
on my own, right? I had my own
yeah,
apartment. So I was, I could write whenever,
right,
no kid, right? Sitting there
right.
all the time in the world. And that's gone. Those days are,
Yes.
those
And
days
it's
are
funny,
all gone.
I'm an empty nester, but I still don't feel like you're still just the
No,
kids, even though they
it's,
don't live with you, it's just
it's
different. It's,
life, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
it's
and I'm not an
so,
empty nester, obviously, but I can imagine always being a mom and having those same thoughts and how are you and checking in. And I'm
right.
sure it never goes away. So,
And they call with some, they can't figure
of
out
course,
something about something, and it's
right,
always, and of course, if your kid
right.
calls, even if you're in the middle of something, right, you're like,
You're
don't
always
bug
going to
me.
get your phone.
You have
You're
to
always
answer
going to
it,
get
right?
your
You
phone.
have
I
to answer
know.
it. So okay. So then one of the things you say in your bio is that you imagine the worst in people and then you write about it. So I always think it's interesting to like. So you obviously, I'm assuming, grew up in a very normal,
Very
healthy.
normal.
Yeah, I know. Me too. My mom's always like, "What happened that this is
No,
what you
I
do?"
had a very good very safe childhood.
Yes, right. So what? So where does it come? Like, where do you think this comes from? This like that our thoughts are so dark and that we're.
I blame my mom. My mom is
Oh,
great,
interesting.
and she's nothing like Ruby, although she looks a lot like Ruby. When I see pictures of my mom from back in the 70s when she was in her 20s, 30s, 5'8", long legs, long
Wow.
black hair, very glamorous. That was my mom back then. So,
Yes.
so Ruby is a little bit like an the visual part of Ruby is like my mom, but my mom loved thrillers. She has been a
Okay.
fiction reader forever, and she liked the dark stuff. She liked Stephen King, and she liked,
Hmm.
Dean Koontz, and all the
Hmm.
big names from back then, and they were what was lying around. And so
Interesting.
when I had finished kind of going through my Sweet Valley High phase, which I was
Yes.
in for a while,
Right. Of
I
course, we
owned books
all were.
1 through 50. I was so proud of that
Oh
collection.
my gosh.
I made the jump into her stuff, which was a
Yeah.
dark adult fiction. And so I think it comes from that.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think I just like trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. Right. I think
Yes.
that's what we do, is we try to explain
I
it to
think that's right.
ourselves.
Understanding the people
Yeah.
that do horrible things. I think it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And you also, as an author, you have to motivate it really well. I mean, that's what's interesting, I think, about Ruby, about the decisions that Joey makes, and even the decisions that sort of the peripheral characters make that we learn more about, in the course of the book. And I'm not going to say anything else about that because I don't want to spoil anything. But the reasons that they do these things, it it makes sense for them, right? We can look at it and be
Yes.
like, this doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense for their lives. And I think that's a really well done thriller, is when you can be in the point of view of a horrible person and be like, I get why they did
And
that,
I kind of get what led to this. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
I
think
think that,
my favorite
yeah.
thing about writing is, and this is like a thing that I aspire to, is to create characters where anyone could be the protagonist, anyone could be the villain. I love when those lines are blurred because no one's perfect.
Yes. No.
And I have a theory that given the exact right, unique set of circumstances for each person, we're all capable of murder.
That was my next question. Is, are we all
I
capable
think
of, right?
the nicest person who would never hurt a fly, given the right situation at the right time in that certain frame of mind, with whatever murder weapon might be lying around,
Right.
I think almost everybody is capable of, in that moment, doing something
Right. Well,
terrible
we
and
think, I mean,
horrific.
and protecting our children, right? That's the first one that
Yep.
comes to mind.
Protecting children's self-defense, or just
Yes.
having a reaction, right?
Right. Right.
And realizing a minute later that was, you just did something awful.
Right. And
I'm
there's
always
no like,
surprised when like when you watch a true crime show and the evil thing happens, right?
yeah.
And it's like, God, that was fast. That happened in like 10 seconds. That was a 10-second
Right.
thing that then changed everybody's lives, that then, spawned an investigation that ended in a trial that put this person in prison. But the thing happened in 10 seconds,
It's a
you know?
forever, right? It's a moment.
It's a forever
It is.
thing.
And that's another really, I think that's a really good point, is like, it's just like a little crack, right? That under the right amount of pressure, it just explodes sort of everybody.
I think so. And
I think people are not surprised to hear when I admit 100%. In the right circumstances, I would kill someone. So. Of course, if somebody
I would too.
If somebody around us dies, though, you know they're going to come looking at us.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we have you in a podcasting.
That's right. That's right. The circumstances are these the circumstances. So,
right.
Oh God. So okay. So the other thing. So we talked a little bit about this at the very beginning, that this is the first time you've had a main character who's Filipino. I thought it was, and I have read a couple of your earlier books, and I haven't read all of them, but I of course read a few and love them. And I thought it was really interesting that you used your own background and so rich. And so what made it, like, you haven't done that in the past? At least you said you did it. One book had a sort of a more minor character who was Filipino, but you have never had a protagonist. So what was different? Like, what made you, so how did Joey end up being,
it's a really great question. And the best I can answer is that when I started out writing, I don't know that I felt anyone would be interested. This was back in 2008 when I started writing my first book, Creep. And my protagonist at that point was half Asian. She was half Chinese, because I saw her as having some type of ethnicity. I didn't see her as being a white woman necessarily. It didn't feel comfortable to me to write about a white woman. I didn't know how to relate to those experiences on the page. But I also remember being really hesitant because I wasn't sure if this was what publishers would want, if this is what readers would want. I hadn't read a lot of thrillers specifically that starred characters like that at that time. And I think over the course of the last, 14 years now, the landscape has shifted. And I think we're starting to really embrace more diversity in our books, diverse authors, but also diverse stories. I don't consider myself really an own voice writer, where I feel like I have something to say and I want to sort of put forth a social message. But I do feel like I do have a voice, and my voice is specific to, I'm a first generation Canadian to immigrant parents. And I grew up speaking only English. I don't speak Filipino at all. When I try, my family laughs because I sound terrible. But yet you get treated that way because people see you and they're like, oh, she's Filipino. And they ask, if you speak it, they assume that you do, or they assume that you know everything about the culture. And it's weird because I'm Canadian, but maybe not Canadian enough. And I'm Filipino, but in the family, maybe not Filipino enough. And so it's sort of this strange space to occupy, and it takes a long time to make sense of it. And so I think when I sat down to write about Filipino characters, it wasn't so much that I had done that purposefully. I think that was always what I was going to want to do. I just feel like now maybe people are open to reading about it. And I think I've always been aware, like, I don't want people not to read my work. So I've been, and also too, I don't want to be unintentionally wrong about something, because readers get mad when you don't do something exactly right, or there's something incorrect in your book. They will email you, they'll talk about it.
I know.
And so, writing about Filipino characters as a Filipino-Canadian, there's pressure to make sure that you're not, one, saying something that's wrong, but also two, doing it in a manner that's respectful of the culture.
It's
and
interesting.
So I was really nervous about this book because they're all bad guys.
Well, that was another thing I was going to say. That's so interesting because
like they're not. I was finishing it going, I wonder what my mom will think of this, because the Filipinos, some of the Filipinos in this book are I'm not portraying them as these perfect people. But again, Filipinos, just like everybody else, have their flaws. And I didn't want to sugarcoat that life anyway. So it was a blend of things, but it just felt really natural and organic. That Ruby was Filipino and that Joey was Filipino and Paris is Filipino.
It's so funny to me too that you mentioned that you didn't necessarily feel like you could, writing a white woman or and it's an interesting change in the dynamic, because my my early stories, I have I have a Black protagonist, and I have a gay protagonist in a book, which felt risky to me at that time, because that book came out in, oh God, I'm going to make myself sound so old, but it was like 2009 or something.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's risky. Now I feel like it's so funny because I love these characters, and my Black protagonist, who's a homicide inspector, shows up in books, even recently. And there is a sensitivity, like, am I allowed, am I
Yeah.
allowed to
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah.
And we've seen so much, there's so many
Yeah.
book examples where people get in big trouble for writing about something, like,
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
think, God, but if all we can write is the little tiny person we are,
It's very limiting, right?
right? How boring is that?
I mean, for me, I would have no problem personally with, let's say a white author or an author who's not Filipino writing with a Filipino character.
Right.
Doesn't bother me one bit. I would just probably be more irritated if there was something flat out wrong about something portrayed in the culture or whatever. I would be like, maybe there's a bit more pressure on you as a non-Filipino person
do your
writing
research
about Filipinos.
Yeah,
you better get it right. And that is an expectation I would have. And so when writing Drew, who is Black, and I don't really specify his background, but I imagine that he's from Jamaica, but he's born and raised in Toronto. And I felt a definite pressure in a way that I didn't feel writing a character named Jerry, because in my first two books, actually in books 1, 2, and 4, there's a Black detective turned private investigator named Jerry, who's a huge character. And I remember not thinking about it as strongly back in 2010, 2011, as I do now. But I think it's a good thing that we're all being really aware that, if you're going to portray a character that's very different from you, make sure that you're doing that as accurately, respectfully as possible. And so this book had two sensitivity readers because I asked. I had a Filipino sensitivity reader just to check me, and I had a Black sensitivity reader just to make sure that I wasn't playing on any stereotypes or writing anything with the wrong language, because that can be very offensive to people too.
It's so interesting. And I do think, to your point, it's we're much more aware, but I also think we have to by actually writing the point of view character of a somebody who's not like me. I feel like I'm learning something, right? Because you have to, you get into their, as a writer, you get into their shoes to kind of live their life, and you watch whatever, you interview people and watch people and sort of because you have to assimilate to their life in a way that obviously we don't. It's much easier to write just a white woman, but you're still any character you write, you're getting into her world.
But it's true, because none of us are serial killers or or rapists or the things that we are the things that we portray. And it really is fiction. But again, it's just a matter of, I think, being considerate, of what you're trying to say, and is there a reason why you've chosen that character to be that way, or are you just wanting to fill a diversity slot in your fiction? And I asked myself that a lot too. And in my in my mind, it's like, no, everyone is exactly how I see them, and it matters. And I think if you can say that to yourself, I think you're probably okay.
Well, and it's interesting, I do think that one of the things that I always reminded myself is, it's not like, I never wanted those characters to be like, if you only have one Black character and he's the bad guy, like,
that kind of thing.
That kind of thing, you have to be. I understand that. Like, I wouldn't want there to be like a whole host of Black people and the one white woman is the,
exactly.
I mean, it's just it makes it feel like a stereotype or a trope or
exactly.
So that so to your point,
but see, that's an awareness. That's great, right? Like, that's exactly how it is. So in my book, everybody's bad.
Yes. I mean,
Filipino, Vietnamese. Actually, I don't have any Black villains, but none. But all the Asians are pretty terrible.
Sorry, Mom. Extents. I mean, I don't think of Joey as being. I don't think of Paris or Joey really as being. They're survivors.
Survivors, and that's the circumstance they were in, and that's the circumstance that they had to kind of live through and make decisions based on. So but again, it's that sort of gray area of
there's a lot of moral gray.
A lot of moral gray here.
Yes, a lot of moral gray, which I love, because that's something you do. you do so well. And I was,
Thank you.
of course, in the end, I want, I loved the end. And I mean, I love the fact that, well, I'm not going to talk about anything about that. I love that.
Thank you.
I love that. Yeah. Shh. But I was going to ask you, because the characters are so vivid in my mind, and obviously I imagine they're so vivid in your mind. And people ask this, and you can just tell me it's a stupid question, because I think it is really probably a stupid question. But do you have, like, who would play Ruby and Joey and Drew? If
Oh
they're
my
actors,
gosh.
isn't that so hard?
It is. That is so, it's tough. For Ruby, I see my mom as Ruby, and she's not an actress, and my mom is 80 now. So she's too old to play the character, but a young Ruby is my mom. And in terms of looks, and for Joey, I don't know, I'd have to probably do some research on who the cool tween Filipina actresses are these days.
Exactly.
But it's hard. They're all kind of, I don't see their faces so much as I see their shadows.
Oh,
I don't know how clearly you see a character, but for me, they're shadows of people. And I think, and so I write them that way because I also want the reader to be able to fill it out how they want to.
Yes.
I get really tripped up in a book when someone's like, she was wearing a pink shirt and black leggings.
Right.
And, her proportions were like, and her hair was this long. I'm like, it's too much.
Right.
My brain is trying to put this all together. Right. Just tell me she was brunette and we can move on.
Right.
Or whatever. Right.
That's true, actually. And that's the thing that's interesting about Drew is really, we understand, Joey and Ruby's Filipino background early on. Drew's description is black, and I understand. Of course, I knew that he was black, but it's much more subtle. It's not a like,
and that's a purposeful thing, because living as a woman of color, I don't think of myself as a woman of color. Right. I know that I am, and when I'm forced to think about it, of course, that's how I would describe myself. But in my very first novel, and I've told this story before, so it's not like a secret, I had that half Asian character, and my editor at the time, back in 2010, had said, so she's Asian, right? And she had an Asian last name.
Yeah.
And I said, yes. And she's like, well, can we just make sure that we emphasize that? Because I don't know if readers are going to know that she's Asian. And I'm like, well, I mean, the name kind of gives it away.
Right.
And I feel like references to certain things. I mentioned that she has a Chinese father. I mean, I don't really know what more, but what she was looking for was a physical description so that the reader would instantly know. And I thought, well, why does the reader need to know that? It doesn't play into the book in any way. And so I actually had to write in a reference into Sheila's dark Asian eyes. And I'm like, that doesn't feel right, because I don't look in the mirror as I'm putting my makeup on going, look at my Filipino eyes as I'm doing that. Right. It's not something we think about. So I'm careful with descriptions that the character themselves would not describe themselves that way, but people around them might make note of it. So Drew, might mention that Joey's Filipino, and that's how we cement that maybe she is, or there's something that someone says to them about that. And for Drew, he's a black man. I saw him as a black man from the beginning, but there is a sentence where he's arguing with Ruby where he says, I'm a black man, you know what I mean?
Right.
In the context of the thing, but I think it's up to the reader to interpret how they see the characters based on little descriptors I may give. And so even Deborah, the social worker, an early reader didn't pick up on the fact that she was black as well. And she is, and that's okay. It doesn't necessarily play into the story in any massive way, but I did describe her dark skin a couple different times. I did say that Drew, that she reminds Drew of his mother, and so if you pick up on it, great. If you don't, that's okay. But again, I kind of leave that for the reader to interpret. But if there's something I need the reader to know, I will tell you that you need to know this. The rest of it is kind of.
I like that, because I mean, that's the thing, like you said, like, how do we describe an Asian person? I mean, we're just going to talk about that, then it becomes a stereotype, right? The Asian eyes, right? I mean,
well, I think that because for so long, the default in our characters in fiction, especially commercial fiction, especially in thrillers, was white men, white women, that I understand at that time, my editor saying, let's be specific here and let people know that she's Asian. But also she's saying that through a white editor's lens to say, hey, as a white reader, I was confused. I'm like, well, as an Asian reader, I wasn't, So it also depends on the lens. And so, but I appreciated the feedback. But what was interesting though is they re-released that book in 2021. So they basically repackaged, they put a new cover on it, allowed me to write a new dedication and a new acknowledgements. And I said, you know what, can I take another stab at some of the edits, because there's a couple of things I want to tweak. And I went in, I took out those references that I was asked to put in, because I'm like, hey man, I feel like I can say that now. And as a debut author in 2010 who didn't know anything,
you don't
I didn't
argue.
feel like I could. I didn't feel like I could push back. And now it's like, you know what? I know that I can. So let me just take some of those references that always bothered me for 10 years. Let me remove
wouldn't
them.
it be fun to get a chance to rewrite some books that are already out in the world? I love that idea.
I know.
I mean, we could spend our lives rewriting.
We could I know. Coming through going, what did I say that was not correct?
Right. Well, that is,
that, and I actually heard that, I think I read on Twitter that Laura Lippman had been doing that, had been going through some of her very early work.
Interesting.
She was just checking to make sure that everything was worded well, and times change, right? And language, we're so much more aware now of what language is unacceptable.
Right.
I mean, it always was. But now we're aware, right? In a way that
people are getting called out. They're getting called out for it, rightly so.
Exactly, and rightly so.
Yeah. But it is a little scary actually, because I mean, what the stupid stuff we did. It's like it's like what our children are going to face, because every single thing that they ever do is going to end up on video and
I know,
TikTok.
Everything's I know. I always feel like I'm one bad tweet away from getting canceled.
I mean, seriously.
Like, I know, realistically, what can I say? But I've seen it happen to other authors where they have had some kind of day and posted something, and the next thing you know,
it's a bit,
they're kind of done, for a bit, at least, I've seen that happen.
But I think there is something, I think we're smarter than that. I'd like to think we're smarter than that. And that perhaps as women, we would ask somebody before we, I want to say this thing, is this out of line? And then somebody would be like, you can't say that, You
don't say that.
You really don't say that. So I want to talk about this cover, because I think I can see the one in your background.
Oh yeah, I have one.
Tell us
slightly different.
Special, is that going to be with all the books? The special?
No, it was a special thing that the marketing department put together for an exclusive list of bookstagrammers that they were going to send it to. It's a marketing thing, right, to get them excited about the book. And so I believe it's a sticker, and they put the sticker over top, and the sticker glows in the dark. So cool. When you turn the lights down, if you turn them down part way, it glows silver, and then when you turn them down the entire way, it glows like green.
It's so cool,
and it's neat. And so I was really excited when I'm like, that's such a good idea. But we live in an Instagram world now. Anything you can do to increase visuals on Instagram, right?
God, it's so much pressure. The social media.
So much pressure.
It is. It's like you feel like it used to be that I just sat in the basement and wrote, and there was nothing else really for me to do.
And I kind of wish it was still like that, and especially with the reviews and all the instant feedback that we writers get. And there's so many ways we get it now. It's not just, your trade reviews come in. It's also, there's a blogger, there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's TikTok. There's of course Goodreads, where I never go because I'm terrified of Goodreads.
I actually think the smartest thing we can do as authors is not read those reviews, because and I say this almost in every interview, is I think to the people who are listening, like, if you hate a book, it's a subjective business, right? You can hate a book that the person next to you will love. And I think giving the author a little bit of grace, you don't have to leave a 1-star review, or if you do, you don't have to be brutal about it. I feel like
I agree with you 100%. I don't leave bad reviews ever.
Me neither.
As a writer, you know how hard it is to get this book done and published and out there. And even if I don't like a book, and I don't like everything I read, of course, I don't want to be the reason someone else didn't buy it. Right. Because I could be my opinion may not matter to you. And I don't want to inadvertently say something that turns another reader off. I would hate to lose another writer a sale. So I would I never post about anything negative, because I just think there's a lot of critics. That doesn't have to be me. That's,
I'm the same. And I take it to everything. Like, if I didn't like a product, I'm not going to review, because it's, again, like you said, it's just, there's so much negativity out there. I don't need to tell you that this,
Yeah.
whatever I bought didn't work out for me. It's okay. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I can, anyway, I agree with that. And it is hard. I think that's the thing that, you know, reviewers don't, I mean, maybe it's hard for people to empathize with how hard it is to read a really brutal review of your book, right?
It stings because, you know, that's a year for me. That's 2 years of my work that went into that. And
Right.
it does really, I mean, I'm better at it now,
Yeah.
but it still stings. The odd time I'll get tagged in something, or I follow my own hashtag on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I should not, because when you're hashtagged in something but not tagged,
It generally is not good
there's
news.
generally going to be not great things in that. And I for some reason
Interesting.
can't bear to unfollow my own hashtag. And that's when I'll see a lot of the criticism. I think it's okay, but sometimes it kind of ruins your day.
Oh,
But
for
that
sure.
being said, I think that reviewers, you know, are great because they can build buzz for your books.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
and generally I think in the community, people understand not to tag authors in negative reviews. It happens very rarely.
Right.
And I do think that, but I think that their reviews are for other readers. They're not meant for us. So
Yeah,
if we
that's
peek
true.
into
That's
them,
totally true.
it's kind of on us, right?
I totally
Unless you
is on
tag
us.
me in something, which is just kind of mean. If you tag
Right,
me in
which
a really
you
mean
don't-
1-star, that
Don't
sucks.
do that. Yeah.
Don't do that. But if, you know, if we're peeking at our Goodreads reviews, I had a friend whose book came out last summer, and she was watching Goodreads every day. She was checking her reviews, and there were a lot coming in. And they were upsetting. Some of them were upsetting. And I'm like, stop reading Goodreads.
Right.
They're writing these reviews and they're not thinking of you. They're thinking of telling what they think about this book to other readers.
Right.
So it's not for you. Just get out of there.
And
Save
most
yourself.
of it's like the Instagram, if people that are listening have not discovered the Bookstagram world on Instagram, that is an amazing place. I mean,
Oh, it's a loving, supportive, generally extremely positive
yes.
community that just loves books and loves telling people about books and loves taking pretty pictures of books.
I know, which I'm so grateful for.
It's basically all love. And it's usually the newbie. Like if I get tagged in a negative review and I happen to click on the profile, it's usually a bookstagrammer that's just getting started.
Yes. So they haven't learned, right?
So they don't, the etiquette, it's like, okay,
exactly.
it's totally okay to hate this book and tell everyone that you hate it, but you don't need to tag me. And
yeah, it's true. But it is a wonderful community and we need them. The reviewers are really vital to, we all know that that's, you know, if you love a book and you give a good review, that's a huge gift to the author.
Yeah, it cannot be ignored. I think when I was starting out, I don't know when you got onto Facebook, I think for me it was 2007. And I had like 30 friends back in 2007 and I knew them all in person, right?
Yes.
And now of course it's like, I don't know how many friends I have. I don't know most of them.
Right. I know.
You just kind of accept because it's like, okay. And it's very different. But the power of social media in certain instances cannot be discounted in terms of building buzz. You know, I don't know if there's any metrics that can say, hey, if you have this many followers, this is how much books you're going to sell.
Right.
But I can say that they're good at hyping things up and getting people excited. So I'm so grateful for that.
To people that, you know, don't know who you are yet. Right. Which is a really wonderful thing when you have a backlist like you do, is that, you know, you find a new reader and that reader has, you know, 7 books to read,
is lovely. Right? And it's funny because with every book that I release, the backlist sales get better. You know, because for a while they had dwindled. I mean, you know how it is, right? You have a book out that's been out for 10 years and it's not even available in print anymore. And you're buying it secondhand if you can even find it. But, you know, the digital lasts forever and that's a good thing.
Yes.
But, you know, they kind of hit a certain period where they're not selling anymore. And that's normal, you know, and then, but when you write a new book, you know, and then if that person loves you, they go, oh, I want to go back and read everything else.
Right.
Which is the best when that happens. Then
it's the best.
Everything gets a bump. And so, yeah, there's been a note. I always tell people, I've been saying this for years, that the best thing you can do to promote your book is to write the next one.
It's so true. And actually,
you can spend a year in promotion world, but let me tell you, the best thing you can do is write the next one.
Right. Which is a really wonderful segue to what's next? Are you fomenting a new idea?
I am fermenting a new idea and I can't lock it down. So I have openings of several different novels happening, which is very normal for me. And that happened with Things We Do in the Dark. I actually felt like I was writing 3 different books and I probably was, and then they all blended together. So I was able to, you know, those stories all connected. I'm hoping the same thing will happen this time. I'm trying not to second guess my process
Right. You
anymore, because I used to all. I'm like, this
Of
is so
course.
inefficient. Like, I need to have an outline. I don't outline. I wish I could.
Yeah, I can't outline either.
You can't either. Okay.
No, I would, I mean, and I oftentimes write, 30, 40,000 words that end up in an out file because
Oh my
I have to
God,
write
me
my way into
too.
a book.
Me too.
I hate it.
I am so glad to meet somebody just like that, because when I tell other writers who are outliners, they cringe for me.
I know.
Like, oh my God, you can't work like that. How do you work like that? And I'm like, I have tried to outline, and in the process of outlining, it loses something for me. I can't get excited. I don't know what it is. I wish I could teach myself to do it. I've done it. I've created whole detailed outlines and then had zero desire to write that book.
Isn't that interesting? Right? Because it's a process of discovery. The magic is in the discovery.
You're right. Yeah. For me, that's
the whole thing.
If I know even the twists, I don't know until they twist.
I know.
Or the reveals. I don't know that until they're revealed. And people are like, oh my God, I saw that coming from so long ago. I'm like, did you? Because I didn't know until the 70,000 word mark. Did you really?
Yeah. I mean, I think, but then, some readers are so freaking smart, right? They've read so many books that they can, but I don't see them coming. And I feel like I read a ton. And
I'm a dumb reader. I'm a dumb reader. And I want to stay a dumb reader. When I read someone's book, I go into it wanting to be entertained. I want to be surprised. I want to be knocked sideways. I can't bring myself to spend the entire time trying to get to that reveal before the author tells me, because I just want to float with the author,
exactly
at their pace, but I want to be entertained. So I consider myself a very dumb thriller reader. And I'm going to stay that way.
Yeah, exactly. Proud of it. Because it is the ride. The ride is so fun. And if you don't know, then the payoff of that surprise is, tenfold. I feel
you're right.
My daughter reads the end of a book before she reads the book. And I'm like, what are you doing?
I used to do that. I hate to admit this. My two horrible writer confessions are: one, I dog ear my books. I know. Okay.
Oh
I know. I do that all the time. I know.
Get you some bookmarks.
I have bookmarks. I still dog ear them anyway. But my second horrible confession is that I don't anymore, read the ending of a book.
Interesting.
And I'm like, why did I do that? And now I understand it was because it was so suspenseful. Yeah. That if I knew the ending, I would slow down and enjoy the journey. But if I didn't know the ending, I'd be peeling through and missing all of the little things that make a book really amazing. And I don't do that anymore. Now I read slow anyway, but
we're more patient now. And I think another reason to do that is I think there's a fear when you get so invested in a character that you're worried that something really horrible is going to happen, like they're going to die.
Yes.
And so I think
I need to know this now.
Right. Or the dog's going to die or something. It's the end.
Like, is she rescued? Okay, she is. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I can go back and now enjoy this. Exactly. Yeah, I know. I get it. I do.
But it does. I just think, oh my God, sweetie, you have to let it. So, but she's reading, so we don't argue. There's some things we don't need to argue about. Well, this has been so much fun. I love talking to you so much, and I'm so excited, Jennifer, that we're going to be at Thriller Fest for the first time in 3 years next week. Although no one will be listening to this until well after we've recovered from Thriller.
By the time you listen to this, Danny and I have hung out at Thriller Fest.
Exactly.
For the first time in person in 3 years.
I'm so excited. Yes. And there'll be lots of fun stuff to come from that too. So, okay. So to close this up here, tell us, where do we find you? What are your favorite social media places? What's your website address? All that good stuff.
Yeah. My website address is jenniferhillierbooks.com. I'm on Facebook at Jennifer Hillier Books. I'm on Instagram at Jennifer Hillier Books, Twitter, Jennifer Hillier, and TikTok, sadly, with my 40 followers, Jennifer Hillier Books, and my 3 videos.
But I have to say, you're a million times braver than I am, because I'm not sure I can go there. So I'm really glad you're doing that. And I love
I'm trying.
Jennifer Hillier Books. That makes it all so easy. All my are different. It's very confusing. So,
oh really?
Well, this will be out July 19th. Is that right? July 19th. And it is so fun, so engaging. You are going to start early in the day so you don't end up all night. It was really wonderful. And I thought all the characters, as horrible as as horrible as the things that they do are, They're aside from Ruby, she's unredeemable, like you said, but the rest of the characters are really wonderful. And I think
Thank
you do
you.
such a wonderful job of creating, bad behaved but wonderful characters. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing this
That's a
with us.
huge compliment, especially coming from you, someone I admire
Oh,
so much. Thank you
that's
so much, Danielle.
Thank you. And this was Killer Women Podcast, a part of the Authors on the Air Global Network with my guest, Jennifer Hillier. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.